You know, I really love coffee. It's one of my favorite drinks. I like it almost as much as I like mare's blood. But you know what else I really like? 1v1 games. Duels. Games where it's just you and one other player battling for victory. Something we really don't see too often anymore in the age of 5v5 MOBAs or 5v5 shooters or 40v40 milsim games or 100-player 4-man team battle royale or the cruel satanic experiment that is 5v5 MOBA shooters. Yes, team games are here to stay, and the multiplayer space has been and will continue to be dominated by them. And while that isn't inherently a bad thing, I do kinda miss dueling games. I just think they're really cool. And in the few places where dueling games are still holding on, I think they're, probably at least, the second most fun thing in the world, just behind pasting your monitor to a picture of a Kami cosplayer with lip injections. 1v1 gaming, at least in my opinion, is the ultimate expression of skill. It's an intimate duel with another player, pitting your specific strengths and strategies against one another and seeing who comes out on top. There's no corruption of the game. It's pure, no bullshit gaming at its most foundational. And since there's only two players who are in absolute, or at least mostly absolute, control of their side of the fight, each individual match can be entirely defined by singular little impulses or ideas that they get. It's 100% determined not just by skill, but like I just said, strategy and knowledge. You might be an overall better player than your opponent, but if they play your worst matchup, or use strategies you aren't good against, or even just catch you on an off day, you might be losing to someone that you or the ranking system considers your inferior. This is one of the best parts of a 1v1 game to me, the purity of them. There's very little getting in the way, especially during LAN events where not even internet connection is a concern. There's no bad or worse malicious or even worse Dutch teammates dragging you and your enemies down. It's just you, them, and whatever excuses you both have for today. This isn't to say that team games are less skillful, of course. There's a lot of genuine difficulty to working as an efficient team and playing a role within a greater engine, especially if you got half of your brain scooped out by that mad German scientist who's been trying to reanimate 50 Cent's tongue. Playing your role, especially, can be a deft undertaking. It's easy to want to be master and commander of the game and to charge into every situation because you totally win these, but it takes discipline to be there for your team and to make the plays they need when they need them, instead of throwing yourself at the enemy because you think that the accursed powerful ring that you bought at the flea market would never betray you. Communication alone is difficult on a team, and corralling 5 or 10 conflicting players who all think that they're him into a cohesive force is a skill all on its own. However, we know that your team does exist as a separator between you and the results. They're a buffer. No matter what, your team is affecting the gameplay in a way that is only to a degree within your personal control. That's kind of the point after all, and that's fine of course, but sometimes it can be annoying or unsatisfying being the guy carrying all the dead weight on your team, or being that dead weight and feeling like you're letting your teammates down. Not to mention, again, that sometimes teammates actively try to harm their team for the epic lulls, and in an era where teams are randomly assembled without any real filtration based on what the team actually wants, and no real way of knowing if the players aren't just lying if there is any, it can lead to some frustration for the more competitively minded people, especially in games like MOBAs, where a single bad teammate represents not just a numerical disadvantage, but an entire unique role on the team that the enemy is just getting to beef up for free, especially if the enemy is playing a character that scales very well. Obviously, in a 1v1 game, the only person you can really ruin the game for is yourself, and with nobody to troll, trolls usually go somewhere else, which results in more matches where people are at least to some degree actually trying. Or if they aren't, they usually lose pretty quick, and it doesn't really matter. 1v1s also allow for greater curation of the experience on the part of the player. Find an enemy who's got a bad connection, or is just annoying, or that you think might be playing illegitimately, or if you're a Tf2 player isn't a snot-nosed unfunny prick, just block them and you never have to see them again. And it's not just about the competition itself. 1v1 games are the greatest canvas for playstyle and skill expression. You and your opponent's individual skills and deficiencies, and what strategies and tricks you personally utilize and prefer, basically what things you're good or bad at, and how many conquered vassals you have, come out into the spotlight in a way that a lot of other games just don't really let you do. And because you're in nearly perfect control of your outcomes, any random thought, any hunch or suspicion or fleeting idea you get can become a deciding play that turns the tide of the whole match. You might get the random, poorly thought out idea to do something, some play, some new counter, some new strategy that defines the game. Now, of course, a player's stylistic expression is present in every game, and it takes many forms, even if it's down to very subtle details like where they like to be on the map and what weapons they like. I just think that 1v1s put the spotlight on it in a way that lets an audience and the competitors appreciate it better. For example, the best 1v1 that ever happened. The duel between Musashi Miyamoto and his own fractured soul, except I don't have footage of that because it happened in 1634, so instead, the 1v1 between Wings of Redemption and Syndicate. No, I'm just kidding. I'm really talking about Evolution Championship 2022. Street Fighter V pools. Now, of course, I'm no spring chicken, you know? I know that not everybody wants to listen to fighting game stuff, and if you don't want to hear it, that's fine. Here's a code to skip ahead. But if you're not going to listen to that, at least let me tell you about today's sponsor. I don't actually know what that is yet because I have to open up this box to find it, so let's go ahead and see. Is that a perfect mathematical recreation of my subconscious? Oh wait, no, it's that thing behind it. Wow, could it be? That's right, the official Kaluka Discord. It's like other Discords, but worse. And even you can join it, so go ahead and This match was legendary, at least a little bit, not just because it ended right before that helicopter crashed into the convention center lobby, but because of its last plays. Our story starts within the last 10 minutes of the last possible round of the match. On Guile we have Kabo, one of the best Street Fighter players period, and on Ryu we have Uzura, who I have to admit I know very little about. The match is just about to end. With 1 point on the board each, this is the final round. Whoever has more health at the end of this 10 seconds progresses into winner's side, which is a much healthier position for the next day of gaming. Uzura makes a calculated jump that goes over Kaba's head, which forces him to block the opposite direction than you would think, leading to him getting hit. However, Uzura either hit the next attack in his combo too late, or too early, and Kaba was able to mash a back throw onto him, sending him into the corner. Uzura gets tricked by Guile's upside down kick, which is invincible to throw attacks, which you can see Uzura tried to do as he got up, leading to Kaba getting a small combo and giving himself the lead. This is a terrible position for Uzura. He's got no health lead, he's got 2 seconds left, and that's a death sentence for most people. But instead of giving up, he risks everything on a sequence that is almost always a terrible idea against a conscious opponent. Kaba did what's known as a V retreat, or whatever the fuck this stupid mechanic was called. I don't remember after I started taking my amnesia pills. Where am I? The V backdash normally would have let Kaba waste time, as this avoids incoming attacks and pushes you away from your opponent, which, when you only have 2 seconds left, is exactly what you need. But what Kaba didn't know is that Uzura is a psychopath. Right as Ryu gets up, he decides to press a button. This forces the PS4 that they're playing on to render a frame. This overwhelms the space heater that Sony uses to cool the PS4, which causes the station to explode live on stream. But before that, he dashes, and dashing in Street Fighter is usually a pretty good way to get punched in the face if your opponent is paying attention. But this dash does place Uzura right next to Kaba, and after that he decides to go for probably the riskiest move a Ryu can do, Dragon Punch. Now, if this Dragon Punch doesn't hit, obviously Uzura loses. He doesn't have enough time to get the lead back in any other way. But even if he did have time, this is what can happen if your Dragon Punch gets blocked or misses. And mind you, I'm not an active Street Fighter 6 player. This is not even close to the best combo that you can get, but it does showcase that there is a lot at stake whenever you do a Dragon Punch. But if almost by a miracle, or perhaps the influence of an ancient sun god, his DP hits, sealing the game for Uzura. He had less than 2 seconds left and spent almost a full second of it completely vulnerable to attack. And even though it did work, depending on who you ask, this is either pig-headed nonsense that was lucky to have succeeded, or a calculated risk made by a thoughtful player. In a vacuum, perhaps, these moves are a terrible idea to do together. Normally, against a strong opponent like Kaba, doing this kind of shit will get you punched in the face. But when you know that your strong opponent only has 1 second to work with and is on the ropes and stressed out of his mind because it's Evo, then maybe doing a dash that places you right next to him after his V-reversal, which is the only move you could do to be there at that time, and then hitting a move that punishes late reactions like a DP can, suddenly doesn't seem like such a bad idea. And mind you, this is a very minor match of Street Fighter. Fighting games are filled with matches like this. This is the kind of stuff that defines that genre and this format of gaming. Fighting games are all about understanding your opponent's desires and building a strategy that works well against them, all the while exploiting their weaknesses. This knowledge-based gameplay is what makes fighting games especially good at having room for unorthodox or outright idiotic plays. Fighting games are games where a lot of shit gets thrown at you really fast. Even against good players, if you're doing silly, risky things that nobody would think you would be doing, it can work just because no one thinks you're gonna do it. In fact, very good, otherwise solid players sometimes sprinkle in a little bit of nonsense just to make themselves harder to defend against. And of course, some players, even really good ones, just play like that. And mind you, this isn't a Street Fighter exclusive thing, this happens in all games. For an example that's a little bit closer to home for this channel, Antony. Antony is a competitive Team Fortress 2 player, and he uses pretty much everything except for the meta guns. And that's pretty weird because in competitive Team Fortress, you almost exclusively use the meta guns and the meta characters. But not Antony, because Antony doesn't give a shit. Now, this style of using weapons that are generally less good and more importantly less consistent than the meta weapons doesn't always work out. Sometimes you go into a lobby, you click on the Liberty Launcher, and just as luck would have it, the Curse of Snakes turns you into a python. That just happens sometimes. But for the times that this does work out for Antony, it works out really well, because most Sixes players are simply not prepared for a soldier to come out of actually fucking nowhere at Mach 4000 and blow up their entire team in one rocket salvo. Like, check out this clip.
Their med demos on 2 right now.
Yeah, you can fight Christian too.
Anybody in the comment section who thinks that they would have like dodged that shit, absolutely no fucking way. Now, of course, a lot of this does require the game itself to not suck balls and to be cool to allow for cool shit like this. But this is gameplay as art at its finest, and I think that 1v1 games allow for more of that to become present than a team game does in an overall sense. After all, it's possible for an individual's input to be lost in this sea of 40 players all doing stuff. And personally, I think that this is something that has guided my preference for games greatly. I wish we had more deep games that allow for this kind of artistry, instead of games that allow for so many subhuman sewer-dwelling mutants to come out to the surface. More games like Tf2 or Tf2 or Splitgate 2 for me, please. But 1v1s aren't just great for the heightened level of competition either, it's a great way to bond with other players and to learn. Even if 1v1s are only offered as a game mode or something, it has multiple uses and advantages outside of just getting good-ass games. You can get intense and direct matchup knowledge, or learn and train against strategies or even whole players that you're weak against, possibly to prepare for bigger events. Any training session could just be boring, normal practice, or it could be a glimpse into the future grand finals match of the biggest event of the year. And that personality, again, is one of my favorite parts of a 1v1. It's not just about playing against your opponent's character, their spirit animal, or their loadout, and it's not even just about playing your character, or even really playing just the game. It's about person 1 and person 2 playing against each other, fighting against what they know about their opponent more than anything. You're sharing in your passion for the game with another like-minded human, possibly even a friend, which you just don't get in a random queue with 9 other people you've never met. Game developers, or more likely publishers, have traded our secluded forums and community servers for algorithmic matchmaking robots who keep pairing me on a team with glowies who don't stop asking if I'm sure I didn't burn my twin brother in a hole full of thermite and lithium batteries. Or with teammates who are just there to see if they win or not without communicating or really actively trying, being stuck in what I like to call the ranked haze, a state of mind where you just keep re-queuing over and over to see the results without putting the required effort to carry the team or get the victories that you want, which of course results you in being on autopilot and being less effective than you can be, resulting in you losing more often. And of course there's also an unlimited amount of horror stories of people describing teams that they've gotten in games. You could get anything from somebody who's just just not very good or is AFK, or you may even get an emotionally unstable nutcase who threatens to kill your sister, but joke's on them, I've had her soul grafted to this obsidian effigy for years. Community servers and blacklists let you selectively breed your preferred pool of no, not like that. Stop it. You can handcraft a list of players that let you get the most out of the game, choosing strong competition and worthwhile training partners instead of rolling the dice and hoping your offlane carry isn't a Russian 8-year-old who's connecting from a harvested Panasonic Toughbook. And not to mention, playing games with people that you like, even if they're internet strangers that you only occasionally talk to, is better than playing with randos. Not to mention, if 1v1s aren't inherently the game mode that's on offer, you have to go like, talk to someone to establish one. This social aspect of games is something that I think a lot of people who played back in like the Xbox 360-ish era miss about modern games. It's especially sad on PC to see that community servers, which used to be just completely standard and were good for the game because it allowed the developers to offload the costs of hosting their own servers onto the community and everybody fucking won, are now a rarely seen commodity among AAA games. This is something that I think more people, and frankly myself included, need to make a more conscious effort to bring back. As games progress, numbers are going to be an increasingly important asset to us, especially after the world's water supply is replaced with fabric softener. And allowing for duels is a really good way to build up that kind of community. After all, people just really like to see the two top dogs, or two big YouTubers or whatever, battle it out against each other and see who wins. 1v1s also tell you a lot, both as a player and a developer, about your game, things that you might not be able to understand or get from a team match. To prove it, I would like to highlight MGE in Team Fortress 2. Now, for those of you who don't know what MGE stands for, it stands for Monosodium Glutamate E621, and it's the community 1v1 game mode for Team Fortress 2. The rules are very simple. You and somebody else fight, usually on the same class, but there are servers that allow you to swap to whatever you want. First person to a set number of kills, which is almost always 20, wins. And as is tradition, the loser is sent into a mind prison where they have to reenact the Hindenburg disaster until they figure out how to survive. But what's cool about MGE, other than that it's good, in my opinion, is that it truly and undeniably showcases how competitively mindful Team Fortress 2 really is, and how well designed it really was. And I say that as a very casual TF2 player. I've only MGE'd a few times. MGE highlights just how well designed TF2 characters really are, and testing yourself both at them and against them is fiercely enjoyable. For example, the Soldier 1v1. A lot of people seem to believe that Soldier is a very simplistic class, and in 12v12 casual, against players who aren't necessarily very good, that can be the case. Shoot floor big score is a funny joke because there is an air of truth to it, but it's only an air. Soldier in actuality can be incredibly deep, especially in a mirror match. And I would argue that this specific mirror match is one of, if not the best showcases of just how good Team Fortress 2 is. On the outside looking in, Soldier probably seems like a meathead character that just has to shoot vaguely where his enemies are for a lot of damage. But when both players are playing Soldier, and both players are competent, things drastically and instantly change. Rockets might have a lot of blast damage and radius, but your opponent also has a rocket launcher. If you're not hitting as many direct or nearly direct hits as you can, then that only gives them more opportunities for them to do the same to you. And obviously, when he wants to be, Soldier is a very fast character. Anytime he rocket jumps, he becomes incredibly difficult to hit, especially if your opponent knows how to airstrafe. And again, you only have 4 rockets and maybe 6 shotgun shells, and you're sharing those rockets between your rocket jumping and trying to kill the opponent, so any misses or any 40 damage rocket hits just aren't going to cut it, and you're probably going to lose because you've placed yourself at a massive disadvantage. Counting your opponent's rockets and shells is actually a really important part of the 1v1. If you know they don't have enough rockets to kill you, you can approach them very freely, especially since you now know that they can't really get away. They could rocket jump, but that would get rid of one of their precious rockets, a little bit of their health, and if you have more rockets than them, you would just chase them down, and they're back to the same position they were in, but even worse. Soldier is also a character that cares a lot about positioning, because whichever soldier can use the floor to get blast damage is going to be at a marked advantage over the other one. And the way that soldiers get to these good positions is, of course, by teleportation, unless they're not really that powerful yet, in which case they rocket jump. And a rocket jump is one of the most important things that happens during the 1v1, and how you deal with it says a lot about you as a player. And one of the most foundational types of rocket jumps is the bomb. You hear about bombing a lot if you watch Sixes or Highlander.
Das Spy. fully flanked.
What the fuck?
Heavy bomb.
It is the bread and butter soldier strategy, and it is pervasive among all skill levels. It's simply the act of rocket jumping at someone to attack them. Even if you're an extremely casual TF2 player, you've probably done it dozens upon dozens of times. But in the 1v1, bombing blossoms into an entirely different beast. And a lot goes on when you try to figure out how to deal with someone who's bombing you. Do you, for instance, stand your ground and try to go for the air shot? How good is their aerial movement? Is their air strafing making it too difficult for you to confidently get a hit? If that's the case, would you rather just wait for them to land and to blow them up right as they do so? After all, when you know where they're going to be and they're going to be on the ground, it's a lot easier to hit at least a blast damage rocket versus trying to hit somebody mid-air who's going all over the place because of their air strafing. If you have the resources to spare, would you prefer to counterbomb, which is literally just the act of rocket jumping after they do, so that you can steal their height advantage? If the situation isn't super favorable for you, would you rather just reset, forcing them to re-engage you with one less rocket and a little bit less health? If you like your spot, you can try to surf your opponent's rocket to get some height without having to use any of your own ammo. And depending on the situation, you can also just drop off the position a little bit, take some cover, and then meet them in a fair 1v1. And if all else fails, there's always the option of hiring a Blackwater mercenary team to just fucking kill them. And of course, that's only the defensive side. This isn't even mentioning how to use bombs to your own advantage, or how else you can approach a soldier on a better position, or other parts of the matchup, like all of the things you have to keep track of, like their ammo, how much health you think they have, and physically where they are as they fly across the map. And this is just one of the matchups. I think there's a lot you could say about pretty much every 1v1 mirror match except maybe Engineer that showcases how well designed this game actually is. TF2 isn't just goofy fun, it's goofy fun made by people who genuinely knew what they were doing. And this is why I find it not only disappointing, but also maybe a little bit disrespectful that some people in this community are so desperate to prove that Team Fortress 2 is just like a shitty party game. All because this community is just completely unwilling to accept that maybe at some point Valve listened to comp players and it was for the better. Like, I've had people say that Team Fortress 2 shouldn't be taken seriously because it's like taking bingo seriously, which is almost hilariously stupid of a comparison if they weren't serious. But the nice thing about Team Fortress 2 is that it doesn't care what the community says about it. It's a really good, deep game whether or not people want to appreciate that. And I think almost every 1v1 in the game showcases this very well. Not as well as Soldier, but very well. But that begs a question. If 1v1s are so much fun, how come I got evicted for only being 2 days late on my rent? And where are they? Well, 1v1s aren't exactly extinct by any measure. There's still a lot of games out there that allow you in some way to play a 1v1 against another player, especially games that have a lot of user-generated content, like user-generated game modes or maps or anything like that. Once the game gives a little bit of that freedom to the player, you know, the freedom to outsource their labor, usually a 1v1 appears somewhere. But outside of that, 1v1s have always been less popular than their team-based counterparts, and this is for a couple of very understandable reasons. For one thing, there is simply nobody to blame but yourself. Even though people complain endlessly about the different teammates they get and how bad they are, like it or not, something about our subconscious likes having other people to blame. We can protect our pride even when we lose by saying that it was the fault of a teammate of ours. And there's more layers to success and failure. If your team loses but you individually had a good KD or something, well, it couldn't have been your fault, right? And even if you're not doing very well, as long as you're doing better than somebody somewhere in the game, you can say, well, at least I'm not that guy. This removes a lot of the sting from losing, whereas in a 1v1 game, it's much more binary. Either you win or you lose, and there's no one around you to blame for that. Except for construction workers. You can blame construction workers for anything and it works out every time. And since you have nobody but yourself to blame, that means that you have to take responsibility for your faults. And frankly, that's just not something a lot of people who play video games are really here to do. And since these games are played primarily by people who are willing to do that, who are willing to improve at the game and try to tackle the things that they're deficient at, they end up being a lot more competitive, just by nature of the people who like this kind of game. And many times, competitive games just aren't as popular, even if they're better. And again, many of them don't force you to look yourself in the mirror and ask yourself why you poured all that gasoline in the supermarket lobster tank. The communities that play these kinds of games, as a result, are very often all business. Unless you make a dedicated effort to be a part of the community, you're not going to get as many of those casual or social moments that you might get in other games. But mind you, none of these are inherently a bad thing, it's just that they appeal to only a niche of gamers. Basically, in a nutskin, they appeal to tryhards. Tryhards and people with real friends, which already cuts out the entire Rocket League community. There's nothing inherently wrong with it, it's just that that's always going to be a niche group. That being said, I still think that the audience size for this is basically infinite, and that's because we really like watching two people fight because it's fucking awesome. And those audiences can be pretty powerful. I brought up the Wings of Redemption versus Syndicate 1v1 earlier, partially as a joke. And much like how a game of craps brings together a city's homeless population, this 1v1 brought together the Call of Duty community. A community of people who are about as distant from one another as you can really get. If you can bring together that community, you can bring together any community. And with any luck, this video might inspire a few people who normally wouldn't have checked out this kind of game mode to try and play it themselves. Once you get over the fact that you're going to lose some percentage of the time, and that those times are 100% your fault, and that that's not really a bad thing, what you're left with is an incredibly social, deep, and expressive form of gaming. However, there's one more problem. This video has been set to self-destruct in 7 seconds unless you type the password from the previous video. Go ahead, chat. Make my day.